In the covenant that God made through Moses with the children of Israel, he said in the book of Exodus, chapter 23, you shall sow your land for 6 years and gather in its yield. But on the 7th year, you shall let it rest and lie fallow, so that the needy of your people may eat, and whatever they leave, the beast of the field may eat. You are to do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. And he emphasized this command again in the book of Leviticus, chapter 25. Now, it seemed to be somewhat of an obscure command, but or something of what we may think of as trivial, of not growing vegetables or whatever, making the land more productive, allowing it to lie at rest for what we would call a sabbatical year, for a whole year, to do absolutely nothing with the land. It seems trivial that we may call it, but nevertheless, it was the command of God. And the interesting thing to understand is that the nation of Israel, 490 years from the time that God brought them out of Egypt and they came into the land that he had promised them, 490 years they were in that land. But we all know they failed to keep the covenant that God made with their forefathers, and God exiled them from the land and put them in Babylonian exile. But what's interesting to note is that the writer of Chronicles, we call it the book of 2nd Chronicles, they were actually one book. But the writer of 2nd Chronicles, as he rehearses the history of the Judean kings and the history of the nation of Judah with respect to the kings of Judah, he makes a very interesting point when he speaks about the length of the exile. And now we turn to 2nd Chronicles 36. And he said it as he comes to the conclusion, the end of his book, and as he looks at the horrors of the Babylonian exile, the destruction by the Babylonian armies, the destruction of the cities of Judah, the destruction of the temple, the vast murders and killings of so many Jewish people, he makes these final statements in chapter 36, looking at verse number 20. He says, those who had escaped from the sword, he carried away to Babylon, and they were servants to him, that is the king of Babylon, and to his sons until the rule of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord. And that is, how long were they in exile? They were in exile to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, for Jeremiah had prophesied that, I think in chapters 25 and 29, that the exile would be 70 years. But let's continue with the reading so we'll make the point. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, notice, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days of its desolation, it kept Sabbath until 70 years were completed. Now, so what is he saying? He's saying that when God exiled them for the period of 70 years, it was not some arbitrary number. God had earlier commanded them, allow the land to enjoy its sabbatical rest, a yearly rest, for every 7 years. And from the time that the children of Israel went into the promised land until the time of their exile, not one time did they ever obey that commandment. But guess what? Although they did not keep that commandment of God, God himself had never forgotten it, and therefore he held them responsible for it. And when it came time to exiling, he exiled them for a period of 70 years. In other words, God said, did I not tell you to allow the land to lie dormant, to rest For 1 out of 7 years, you never did that. Therefore, as I exile you from this land, you will be gone for 70 years because that's what you owe. What do you think about that? What does that make you say and to consider about the exacting nature of God? Let me put it this way. The Lord Jesus says that we will give an account of even the idle words that we speak. You know, sometimes we think that when we stand in judgment, it's going to be a happy time and a good time, and God is going to say, okay, all's well that ends well. But the Bible constantly warns us that judgment will be an exacting experience, and knowing that we will stand before an all-knowing, all-righteous, all-remembering God. Just like Israel thought God forgot, let us not ever make that mistake to think He will forget what we will do. What did Jesus say? You will even be held account to the idle words that you speak. And knowing these things, how should we live? Did you know that?